Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis.
This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
Saved by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Ray Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Ladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders, it's gonna be one.
They've scored! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter can say cheated.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Joining me today is Matt Baker of Flyover Footy, one of our recurring guests. This is like the third or fourth time you've been on the show now, Matt. It's great to talk to you again.
It's fun to look at this every single time we match up because it always seems like we have something interesting and different to talk about each time.
These are two teams that seem to be all over the place in various ways or another. And right now, St. Louis is not in a great place. This is probably the low point of the relatively brief MLS existence, I would guess. Bradley Carnell recently let go. The team is in the midst of a 1-8-3 run over the last 12. I guess let's just start. Does it feel like this has unraveled all of a sudden, or has it been slower than it might look from the outside?
I would say it's been a slow burn. And it's been one of those where you have enough positives to take away from each of these individual games, dating back to around the time that we played the first go round in 2024, where at the time we had a slew of draws. We had racked up 3 wins at that time. You were our third loss in a row that would eventually stretch to just about till now. And you had enough positives either on the offensive side or defensively. A majority of the positives were defensive. We were putting up good performances. There were very minute individual spots of games where we would just let our guard down and we had to play the full 90. You could talk through all of these. We had injury concerns. Leuven, Klaus, our DPs have been hurt at various times. And then it just became all of a sudden this Vancouver Whitecaps game here a few weeks ago, not the one this past weekend, but 2 or 3 weeks ago. It just escalated so quickly at that point because we had leads. We couldn't protect leads. We gave things up. We eventually gave the game away. And all of a sudden, a day and a half later, Bradley Carnell was fired. It was a shock to the fan base by and large. I would say 95% of the fan base was not of the Carnell out mindset, just knowing how many injuries, how many unavailabilities had been occurring. You had so many built-in excuses for Bradley Carnell in what he had available and the roster that had been built around him that it was a shock to have that happen. But it was also, come to find out, a shock to the players. Indiana Vasilev, one of our key players in the attack, told us right after that happened that he found out when he showed up to training. And it was the first time that he had ever lost a head coach as a player. And so the team now, at that point, when things escalated quickly, over the past few weeks, yeah, there was a bounce back game against San Jose, but who doesn't have a bounce back game against San Jose, right?
Right.
you have this.
Well, us. That's one team that doesn't. But anyway,
fair. Even Kansas City beat them just recently, but unfortunately, it wasn't a team that we could build anything off of because the past couple of games have just amplified and magnified the issues that we had. I would say at this point in time, heading to Seattle, not to give up too much of what I have to say tonight, but we are at the absolute lowest point we could be simply listening to the players and our interim head coach, John Hackworth, talk post-game after Vancouver most recently, talking about how it was an embarrassment of a game at home, losing 4-1.
how the team had no cohesion, players were pointing fingers, the locker room was fragmented. I mean, you had everything you do not want to hear being said out loud by the players after they were embarrassed on their home turf.
Yeah. So you go, from the outside, the whole Bradley Carnell thing is fascinating because from where I'm sitting here, you have a coach who was considered one of the I think a lot of people's pick to win Coach of the Year last year. I think there was a very good case to be made that he was Coach of the Year. And frankly, if this was the season that you guys were having last year, which is the season that it may have even this may even been an improvement over what a lot of people were predicting for your first season, and to go from and then not a lot changed in the offseason. And Carnell had been hired a year ahead of time. He clearly the identity of the team was sort of built around his coaching philosophy, or at least at the very least his coaching philosophy seemed to fit seamlessly into the framework of what the organization saw. And it just felt like all of it, like he wasn't even on my list as a player, as a coach who was on the hot seat.
Mm-hmm.
Are you learning anything else as to, was something else going on behind the scenes that sort of led to all this?
Well, looking back at this entire season, it's been just an amalgamation of issues. I mentioned the injuries. I mean, you're talking about, at least at this point in time still, we're without our designated player Klaus. We're without Rasmus Alm, Celio Pompeu, Tomas Ostrak. All four of them had been key in our attack earlier this season. Edu Leuven has had bouts where he's been out for extended periods of time. Joachim Nilsson, one of our starting center backs, has been here and there, and he's currently out recovering from an injury. So Carnell has been hamstrung in the players available. And that's going back to the offseason, like you mentioned, we made one key trade, sending out Jared Stroud and Lucas Bartlett for Chris Durkin. And Chris Durkin has been an impact player, a difference maker for St. Louis City in the midfield. Absolutely. But Jared Stroud with him went 10 goal contributions. You also sent out Nico Gioacchini, sold him to Como. There's another 10 goals lost. And you never replaced any of it. Celio Pompeu is the only reason that the loss of Jared Stroud was not as big of a deal, because he took that left midfield role and he ran with it, legitimately ran with it. One of the hardest working players, fastest players on our team. But then he was lost to the season with an ankle injury, blew out his ankle. And so now that contribution that was supposed to replace Jared Stroud is lost. You still, sitting here mid-July, have not replaced or had available a replacement for Nico Gioacchini. So for the past, I would say 3, 4, 5 weeks, it's been, we've got to limp into this transfer window when we can bring on potential difference makers in Cedric Teuchert from Hanover, Marcel Hartl from St. Pauli, and Jake Girdwood-Reich from Sydney FC. Guys who we spent a good amount of cash to get these guys, but this team seems to be falling apart before they can even take the field.
Yeah, and then on top of the players you've already mentioned, Sam Adeniran apparently today wasn't in training because it looks like a deal is getting close to being made to ship him out either within the league or outside of the league. And then you also traded Aziel Jackson, who was another player who was a big contributor last year, and neither Jackson nor Adeniran had been able to come close to replicating what they did last year, in part because they were having trouble just getting on the field, right?
Yeah, these are the two players where you have to say, okay, Bradley Carnell was hamstrung with the injuries, but these are two players that should be contributors, should be difference makers to a depleted roster. If you're saying we're willing to send AZ Jackson away to another MLS team in the midst of this depth issue, and we're willing to sit Sam Adeniran, a healthy Sam Adeniran, we're taking him out of training because we're having a butting of heads between him and Carnell. He's got trade transfer rumors going around. We're voluntarily sitting him, knowing we have these depth issues. That to me speaks more of something is going on behind the scenes between players and coach, players and staff, players in front office, coaching staff in front office. I don't know, but you can't go through these injuries and say that you're hamstrung because of depth when you have two healthy players that you're moving or sitting. And that's where I come to Bradley Carnell had something else going on, whether it was a lack of trust in his ability to right the ship when the healthy players did come, just a continuing. Lutz Pfannenstiel, in his press conference after Carnell was let go, seemed very clear that he had no intention of wasting away this season. It was, we're making the playoffs this season. That was his statement. And he had lost the confidence that Carnell could bring the team from the brink in order to still have a chance when the new guys came. And now we're seeing that wasn't necessarily the case because even John Hackworth, who himself has been with St. Louis City since 2 years before they took the field in 2023, he developed our system right alongside Lutz, originally the director of coaching, then the technical director, now interim coach. He was the head coach for City 2 back in 2022, implementing all of these same systems and styles. And he's not able to get this out of the players. He's not able to take what they did in San Jose and replicate it against Colorado and Vancouver. And so now we're at the point where a lot of us are arguing that the brink has passed. We've fallen off of this ledge to be able to come back now with just 11 games left.
Right. And so you sort of alluded to this you had a sort of a dead cat bounce game, maybe against the San Jose Earthquakes, but then back-to-back 4-1 losses, first on the road to Rapids, which, it happens, but 4-1 loss at home to the Whitecaps, a team who until relatively recent was having struggles of their own. But going into this game, there is you alluded to a lengthy injury list. What is the update on a guy like João Klaus? Who is he going to be back for this game? Or what are any other injury updates that we need to know?
Honestly, if you look at the player availability from Vancouver this past weekend, I would expect a very similar list of players out. Klaus is going to remain out. Rasmus Alm is still going to remain out. Celio Pompeu, Tomas Ostrak, they're out for the season. Joachim Nilsson may see the game day roster. He was on the game day roster last weekend, but he didn't play. And they're being very cautious with him because he has a history of knee injuries. And he's a difference maker at center back. He's one of those players right alongside Tim Parker that if they're both healthy and if they're both in form, I would argue they have the potential to be a top center back duo in the entire league. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to see that for an extended period of time. And with Nilsson still recovering, I think there's a little more of a penchant for let's not rush him, especially on turf, I would say. And so you're likely to see Tim Parker and maybe Kyle Hebert, who's returning from Copa America with Canada, or Tim Parker and Josh Yarrow on that back line. Other than that, we haven't picked up any new injuries, thankfully. Sam Adeniran's not going to be available because he wasn't training on Monday. So it's still a depleted roster. It wouldn't surprise me if we go in with a total of 19 guys, unless we have another short-term loan. And that's been the hallmark of St. Louis over these past few weeks is we've used a lot of our short-term loans from City 2, and we've been signing a lot of players from City 2. In addition to the 3 that I mentioned who are incoming of the transfer window, we've signed Jaden Reed, a left back, Johnny Klein, an attacking midfielder, and Michael Wenzel, a center back, all from City 2, who, they've definitely reached the pinnacle of City 2 and proven their worth, but now we're counting on them to be starters. And in an ideal world, even a relatively ideal world, at least 2 of those, Johnny Klein and Michael Wenzel, are depth pieces now. You do not want to have to rely on them, but that's what we're taking into Seattle. And I don't see much of a difference. And even John Hackworth said in his press conference on Monday that he's not expecting to change too much from the lineup and the roster from what we had against Vancouver.
So obviously, this is MLS. Results can go any number of ways, even with as depleted as St. Louis may be. The gap between them and the Sounders is still not unbridgeable. Let's just say results can happen, but I don't necessarily. I'm sure you're not super high on St. Louis's chances in this game. We don't need to get too deep into that. But what I am going to ask is that you sort of take a broader view, and I'm just curious if you take these 2 seasons as the start, and you sort of remove the recency bias from them and you sort of take them as a collective and you try to project it forward, would you say that, I guess, do you think St. Louis is broadly where they sort of envision themselves being right now? And more importantly, how close they are to getting to where they want to be?
Yeah. And I keep going back to the injuries, because if you remove the injuries, even half of the injuries we've been going through, I think this team is markedly different. Even just a couple of depth pieces in the attack would make all of the difference in the world. It would have probably netted us an additional 5 points in this stretch, which would put us in the fight for a playoff spot more seriously. So if you look at overall last year, which I do agree, last year we overshot our mark significantly. I think if you had reversed the seasons like you were talking about and you had this season first, basically in line, bottom feeder, you would have built in excuses of saying, right, if you didn't have these injuries, imagine where we could be. Just wait till next year. And then that next year comes when everybody's healthy and you win the conference type of a thing. Right. That's kind of the story. And in reverse, it's just tragic more than anything else. But once you get these guys healthy, Celio Pompeo is going to come back. Even if he comes back at 80%, that's still pretty good for his development. Tomas Ostrak's going to come back. You're going to have Klaus. Nilsson is still under contract for a few more years, and he's getting to be on the other side of 30, but he's still that high-level Swedish national team type player, former national team type player. And now you bring in some of these potential difference makers. Cedric Toyhurt was the first one that we brought in, and he was projected to be not a Klaus replacement, but I would say a Klaus complement. We talked about him way back in February as a Nico Gioacchini replacement. That's where I see him, a second striker, potentially a winger, somebody who can complement Klaus. That's what we've needed this entire season. And so now you have that player to build off of going forward. Marcel Hartl is our third designated player who's, I think we're going to be buying down Roman Berkey is the likely option, but now having a legitimate designated player, number 10 attacking midfielder who has 30 plus goal contributions to his name over a single season. That's the kind of player who can complement a healthy roster, adding the depth and giving you a lot of confidence going forward to the next season that this is going to return to form for what we had last year. And I think this is going to be such a big wake-up call and a learning point for Lutz Pfannenstiel, our sporting director, in that you do need to bolster your depth more intentionally for if these things kind of happen. You can't play on a razor's edge of your starting 11 can beat any other starting 11. But once you get past that and into one or two depth, then you have massive problems. I think this is his wake-up call to shore that up. So all these things together, I do have confidence that taken as a whole, these two seasons, we're going to bounce back to top 4 contention next year.
You know, and a lot of people made a lot of hay out of Lutz's statement before the season started last year about how we don't have a designated player, we have a designated team. Mm-hmm. And that sort of has been the roster build philosophy up until now, where it seems to be maybe that's starting to change. Do you think that was sort of always the plan, though, is to see how things go and then get an injection of money into the second year, I guess was to be the 4th transfer window they've had access to?
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that this is an organization and an ownership group that wants to see their sporting department be self-sufficient. I don't see massive injections of money coming from the ownership group in and of itself. I see this as you built a foundation. You were fairly frugal in how you did it. You were smart in how you did it, obviously, with their first season. But you have, I don't think it's a correlation without causation that you sell Nico Gioacchini for $2+ million. You sell AZ Jackson for a little bit, and now you're suddenly able to splash some cash and bring in another designated player in Hartl. And so I want to see that continue. And so while we worry about the results on the field, while we worry about bringing in new players, I'm looking at who we're developing as potential sell-ons as the first indicator of future buying and how much money we're going to have at our disposal in the future. That's why, and AZ Jackson with all these performance bonuses, I'm going to be watching him very closely in Columbus, seeing how much we get for Sam. That's going to be vitally important to what we can replace him with eventually. And then who knows what other options we might be having in potential sales going forward, but that's going to be a key driver in how much St. Louis can spend. So you look at how when The Athletic comes out with these articles of salary spend, St. Louis is going to show incremental growth, but I think we're an organization whose growth in spend is going to be directly attributable to how much we sell.
Fair enough. And on that same token, what's your expectation on where Ed Deneren's going at this point?
The last rumored place was Lask with Austria. And that rumor came out around the time Bradley Carnell was dismissed a few weeks ago. Prior to that, there had been rumors dating back to the end of last season for a 7-figure interest from Europe. And I think that's where originally, with all the promise that Sam Adeniran had before this season's issues with the staff, issues with playing time, and honestly, issues on the defensive side became magnified. That's where we were at, hoping to get the 7 figures worth from Sam. And now with the sale of Nico Gioacchini, I think we realized we needed him a little bit more. It hasn't worked out. We have the issues with the staff, and it sounds like because he was held out of training, a move is going to happen extremely quickly, though John Hackworth did say nothing's been decided. I wouldn't be surprised if it was more like a mid-6-figure deal and he does go to Europe.
Well, that's good news for Sam, I suppose. And I suppose in a roundabout way, some good news for the Sounders, because I guess they still have a sell-on fee attached to Adeniran. But anyway, Matt, thank you for joining us. It's always fascinating to see what's going on in St. Louis. You do a great job covering them over there. I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Oh, wait, before we do that, where can people find you? Where can they listen to you? Where can they read you?
X, Instagram, anywhere on social media at Matt Baker STL, and then on my podcast at Flyover Footy. We do 3 episodes a week. So if you're ever interested in St. Louis coverage or just what's going on in flyover country, give us a check.
Absolutely. All right. With that, I am Jeremiah O'Shan. This is Nos Adietes, and we will catch you next time.
We love you. Let's win another one.